All right, welcome back to Year One Podcast, episode 3. We do apologize for not bringing out an episode last week. We were, with a heavy heart, we weren't able to upload, but we're quickly learning the value of consistency, and as we keep on producing these, it'll become more like clockwork. So glad that you guys are on this journey with us and enjoy another episode. But the boys had an interesting week this week. So Zach, I mean, you just got back from India, from Mumbai, doing a train trip. Want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, fresh off the train here. Uh, so it was 8,000 kilometer journey, which is the equivalent from East Coast to West Coast and then back to the East Coast. And the theory behind it's an organization that's been around for 15 years, and it has a mission of encouraging entrepreneurship in India. The organization and the train trip is called Jagriti Yatra, which in Hindi translates to awakening journey, in reference to awakening the entrepreneurial spirit of India. So it was a fantastic experience overall, and the best thing was meeting lots of ambitious um, young Indian kids. And then this year, that organization partnered up with G20, which India held the presidency of this year, and India spearheaded the creation of something called Startup 20, which is the new entrepreneurial wing of G20, which is great because now there's going to be representation for entrepreneurs at the global scale when the people are having those high level conversations. But overall, it's a great place. Um, there's a lot going on there. They're recently minted as the most populous country on earth. They have a democracy that seems to be thriving from my limited perception in 2 weeks. And a lot of entrepreneurial spirit backed up with a high value that they place on education, and a whole lot of skills. I know that we've all probably seen or interacted with companies of all sizes that outsource to India, or Gavin and I have gone on Upwork or Fiverr and found a whole lot of skilled Indian labor that can be hired. So it was really interesting to peel back the curtain and see what it's like from the inside, have conversations with basically our counterparts in India, the ambitious young people that are motivated, have a drive, and are grounded and rooted in some pretty strong values. So yeah, it was great. Um, I know that you guys have some interesting perspectives on India that you wanted to share as well.
I'd be interested to hear what kind of perception the Indian people had with talking to an American, and like, were they amazed that an American was in India on a train at an entrepreneurial like summit, or how is that perceived from them?
I mean, within the context of the train journey in particular, I was one of 70 international delegates, um, representing various countries. So that wasn't that much of a surprise, but they definitely were very interested. Uh, it's it's almost like the equivalent of if global geopolitics is high school, America's the popular kid. And even if people don't necessarily like us, they always want to talk about us. So it was funny to have the conversations a lot, and I also found them to be an incredibly genuine and an incredibly direct group of people.
Mhm.
They both in sharing their own life story very transparently, as well as asking direct questions. And the three top topics that they wanted to talk about were guns, trans people, and Trump. The three things they wanted to talk
I think sort of speaking to, them being very direct in sort of their culture, I find it very interesting, right? You have this country in South Asia who has what, 1.4 billion people now, the most people in the world. And you see it a lot, bringing that back into the United States, you see a lot they'll do their undergrad studies in India, and then they'll come over to the United States and they'll work their ass off. I mean, just look at powerful Fortune 500 companies. It's filled with Indian American and Indian in a lot of cases leadership, right? I think it's like Microsoft, Google, Starbucks, the Prime Minister of the UK. It's a lot of these Indian guys, and girls. Twitter being the girl example just off the top of my head, woman. I'm sorry. And it just speaks to sort of their ethos and how they grow up there. And it's quite interesting. Because you'll see it. It's a lot of first generation, second generation, but they work hard and they have sort of this like pseudo American dream. Call it the Indian dream, but they do it. And I wonder what that says a lot about their culture. So I always find India obviously super interesting.
Yeah, and that was something that came up a couple times on the trip, right? Because they're very aware and very proud, frankly, of the now foreign nationals that are of Indian origin and serve in high positions. The UK Prime Minister at this moment is also Indian, and he got brought up a lot as well. And part of the intention that was pretty directly talked about in this journey was, hey, yeah, it's great that all those guys are Indian, but imagine if Sundar Pichai was had not stayed in the US and come back and built a business in India. Imagine
Right.
all the value that was lost in this brain drain,
Hmm.
um, which is kind of interesting because then it becomes a question of, okay, is that a zero sum game then? Because it, frankly, in my opinion, one of the US's greatest assets is this idea of, hey, come here and you can build your dreams. And we attract the best and the brightest minds from across the world as a result of that. So is it a zero sum game of, does India have to lose their best and brightest? As an example, India, but obviously other countries, in order for the US and other kind of immigrant based countries to gain? Or is there a way for there to be a win win scenario?
No, that's a good point.
That's super interesting. Like a point because part of the appeal of the US and I think Europe for that matter is it's like the place to live, right? And so all these people from all over the world like travel there on that idea and so I think what's always been interesting to me is when you think of Saudi Arabia, and I know this was a big issue there, was you had a lot of people with wealth, but they were just spending it outside of their country. So kind of the UAE, I think, is that first country, I think probably outside of like Europe, the US, and maybe like China, right? Which was, okay, we're going to build something like an ecosystem in our own country and we're going to try to bring entrepreneurs. And so I know that there's a lot of companies now that are like big startups in the UAE and whatnot. And I think that that's kind of like the blueprint by which like countries like India, Saudi Arabia with their whole 2030 goal, the line, all those crazy projects is trying to just bring people back to their own countries or bring people from like you're saying like from India it could be or from some of these smaller countries like Pakistan or Iran and saying like you want to build a business build it here, don't go to the US or whatnot. So I definitely think it is going to be a zero sum game on who gets the best talent. Yeah.
But it could be for talent wise, it could be a zero sum game. But in terms of the economic value being created, I wonder if most of that value that people create over here is being sent back.
Right.
And if they earn it here, then they sent like I know when I was in South America is the same way. Like there are a bunch of skilled workers and these amazing coders and technical people, but they would be sending back money to South America. So I don't know if it would be a zero sum game in the economic respect of it, because then everybody kind of grows together.
I think Felipe, I think you should tell our guest here how you got to meet someone who's actively having this conversation often, right? You got to meet Mr. Teal
Yeah, so
recently.
I had a bit of a week this past week. So I mean, to start, I've been working on a political campaign. We ended up losing our political campaign.
Mhm.
I was working on that for a month with my brother. So it was a pretty depressing last Tuesday kind of night. But before that, all of that, I ended up going to a conference on mimetic theory, which is kind of this, I guess, like on fire idea that kind of was really popular within certain subgroups of kind of entrepreneurs or VCs, which the idea being that humans are mimetic in this are like copy other people to achieve like other ideas or that they have in their head. And Peter Thiel is one of those people that's like very popular in this idea or like huge believer in it. And I think he accredits it with one of the reasons why he invested in Facebook in the first place. So I got to see him at this conference, and it's super interesting because you think sometimes like, oh, Peter Thiel's like only interested in technology, and he gave like probably an hour and 15 speech on this topic, and all he was talking about was like philosophy, history, mimetic theory, and then like tying it all in into like the world we live in. um and I mean, it was pretty depressing, his like conclusion of his speech being like, we're in this period where like innovation's dying, like in the US we're kind of uh putting too much bureaucracy and like over institutionalizing everything, um, which I think is interesting when you're talking about what uh, Zach, when you're talking about like the entrepreneurs being part of this like G20 representation or whatnot, because I think Peter Thiel would say like that's actually like horrible or something, which like makes you think like why that is, but super cool and just awesome to meet him. So yeah.
Yeah, he has one quote that I just love by him. He sort of speaks to Asperger's and like how so many successful CEOs in the United States and just abroad, it seems like they have like this mild form of Asperger's, and he points that back at to society and says it's sort of an indictment. Like, what does it say about a society where people with small forms of Asperger's do so well? And I think the point that he's trying to get at there is that generally we're sort of keen in on this idea that like you shouldn't do something, like you shouldn't do something that you think of randomly. You should, go start a restaurant or something, do something else that like society is more I guess, I don't know, associated with. And it's like the people who do really well are the people who sort of do what society doesn't tell you. It's almost contrarian, in a sense. And I always found that interesting about Teal. I love Teal, obviously.
Yeah, and it's interesting in a like as society gets more information heavy in general, like information is just so accessible, and as people are surrounded by kind of other people and the way they live, is that influencing the innovation rate? Because if that mimetic theory holds that people copy other people, and since information is so readily available, then that information is just kind of dumbing people down and making it less likely that they're going to carve a new path. And then what Peter Thiel would say is the people that don't care are the people that will achieve those things that nobody else is thinking of right now.
Hmm.
Yeah, I definitely. I mean, like, I'm just trying to think, like, or remember when I read Zero to One, he basically brought in like the example of Elon, like when he was investing in clean tech, I think, or I don't know if he was investing in Elon specifically, but he was saying like all these people would show up in suits for like the clean tech investment, right? Because the government had poured in like billions of dollars for these like subsidies or whatnot. And he knew like if anyone comes in a suit, they're no bueno, because like these guys are just professional hustlers, like essentially like really good at saying all the right words, but aren't going to do anything with that money. And then when he saw Elon, like he's wearing a t-shirt, jeans, like guy doesn't care, and he's like, yep, this is my guy, right? So there is that certain thing happening. And like I think now when you go to Silicon Valley, like if you wore a suit to a meeting in Silicon Valley, everyone would look at you like you're crazy. Like, who is
Uh-huh.
this guy? Because now everyone copies the person who wears like a t-shirt and
Uh,
jeans, like the casual Mark Zuckerberg, you know? So yeah, I mean, it definitely is like you have to think where other people aren't thinking, because like if you're in the middle of something that everyone's like, oh, this is hot, like this is, you can make so much money in it, you're probably already too late, right? So
right. No, that's a great point. Just piggybacking off the t-shirt and jeans, it's almost became like a little virtue signaling in Silicon Valley. It seems like a little bit. The Scene to Love has a great example of that. It's like if you see like the Hollywood doctor, it's like you're going to the doctor and you like see like the Hollywood like handsome ass like doctor, and then you see like the ruggedy guy, go to the ruggedy guy because how did he get there? If he has dirty hands and stuff, that's the one you should probably go to, because he had to do so much to get there and he's probably an actual expert at it. When you have all these aristocrats, the fancy suit guys, a lot of them just tend to be frauds, right? But they're looked at as sort of experts. So I love that.
I think that now that the one thing that is good about information being available, though, is that people can see through that so much easier now. For example, with like Elon Musk, people can see everything that he's done, and before it was never really like that. Like anybody in a suit could tell you, oh, they have this great business opportunity, and you just have their word to believe them. But now it's like you can dive into the details, you can see what's behind that, which is interesting, because if information is available, then you can't hide. You either have it or you don't.
But I,
but
I
do
would push back against that because look at how many
Yeah,
cases of fraud we've seen recently, you
yeah.
know, and
I think it's
Give an
twofold.
example.
the FTX,
Yeah, yeah.
Theranos.
yeah.
Yeah. I think it goes both
But
ways, right? Because it's like on one side, it feels like we're very overstimulated with so much information. And because of that, that sometimes can lead bad. But on the counter, like you're seeing it a lot what's going on internationally in foreign affairs, where it's like, you go on Twitter, if you go on CNN, everyone told you that Vivek, lost the Republican debate, right? But if you go on Twitter, they did a poll and it was like 200,000 people voted, and most people said that Vivek won the debate. So it's like we have so much information that it either hurts you or it helps you. But if you find the right information, you're good.
Yeah, to
but
me,
I'd
like,
push back on that as well, because those people got caught, and it didn't take very long for those people to be known as frauds.
It didn't take very long. They stole billions and billions and billions of dollars and were lauded as the people to emulate in society.
Fair.
Yeah, but they ultimately, the truth came out.
Sure.
After they made their bill, look at the WeWork guy. Newman's worth $2 billion. His company is worth pennies on the dollar.
And he just raised another like hundreds of
Yes,
millions of dollars too.
right.
I mean, I see what you're saying, Gavin, in that theoretically having all the information should lead to transparency, right? That just logically makes sense. But it seems as if that's disconnected from the actual result. And we can talk about why. I think part of it is like what I think you said it, Micah, is like there's so much information that people just can't parse through all of it, and then they look for other people and like, oh, they say, oh, SoftBank invested in WeWork. Okay, that check. Somebody there must have done their due diligence, and there's this like chain of like a race to the bottom almost
Right.
until finally the rug gets pulled out because somebody has the guts to say, wait a second, things aren't adding up here.
No,
Yeah, I go
I
ahead,
think you
Felipe.
can be a fraud. I think you can be a fraud much easier than like now more than ever. Like Tim Ferriss has a really good bit in the was it like the 4 Hour Work Week where
Yeah.
he's like, okay, you want to be an expert in something, and like he came up with this like, I mean, you kind of had to put in like a little bit of work, but like you think you want to be an expert in like his example was like, I don't know, it's like uh skin cancer or something like you would think would be super technical. Like you write a book on it, you can get it published on like Amazon or whatever. Then you go give a speech at like a university saying like, can I rent out this classroom, whatever, get two cameras at opposite sides of the room so it like looks like you have like a bunch of credibility, upload those onto YouTube, and then show up to like another person being like, well, you know, I gave a speech at Maryland, and I gave a speech at UMD. Here's like or UVA. Like here's my script. Oh, I also wrote a book on the issue. Like I don't know. Like you can leverage it in a way that like it makes you look like you're some super genius. And maybe skin cancer is like you might need to be like a doctor, but like I don't know. Like you look at like a Liver King or whatever. I think that that part's like so hilarious. Like you just like put some things together and like say like, oh yeah, you should have sunlight in your eyes or something because like
Yeah.
it gives you vitamin D or
No,
something
it's
crazy
a
like that. It
that's
works,
a
you know?
great point. That's a great point. Like the C made it famous, but it's like the expert problem, right? It's like things where you're like graded on your peers, right? Like if you're like this famous like academic or something like that, that's like you're graded on your peers, where it's like things that actually matter, like things where you actually have skin in the game. It's like your P&L. Let me look at that. Right. What are your results? I don't want to care about the Musha and whatever baloney you're trying to sell me. You always see the stuff on TikTok and social media where it's like people are selling like how to be like a great speaker or be a great entrepreneur. They're not that's not going to make you a great entrepreneur. They're selling to you. You're buying with their product, right? They're making money off of you. So it just speaks. That's so big. I can't wait to expand on that.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
agree that attention is easier to garner. However, I do think the feedback loop in terms of trust and truth is faster. Like if you look at the biggest businessmen in the world, like, well, that's probably not a good example, but like Bernie Madoff, for example, he was never found out until the end of his life, like end of his days. I wonder if he did that today, if it would last that long, or if that truth would come out. Like I think that it's much easier to get attention for sure, but I'm not sure if it's easier to keep that attention in a positive light if
I
you are
mean,
fraudulent.
look at Sam Bankman-Friedman or whatever his
He's
name
done probably
is.
5 years.
Yo, but like you just have these guys who can raise so much money, who could have so much monetary like
It
sort
was
of
easy for
power.
him to get attention, but then to hold it, no.
But the fact, I think we're sort of talking past each other because the fact is, how is that person even able to do that in the first place is more of the problem, right? Like it took, like you said, it took 5 years, but this guy had so much power at one point. And it's just crazy. Even like Bernie Madoff, he got like caught like off the fluke, but they'd been tracking this guy. The company in Boston have been tracking this guy for like 10 years. You're like, this guy's a total fraud. But until like the GFC like matched up, Wall Street needed, some enemy that they could actually, blame for a lot of this. And he was the fall guy almost.
But
With that example.
if you think that it takes one person to stand up and put their foot down, wouldn't you think that since it's easier to get attention, then it's going to be more likely that a person will be that person to stand up because it's reaching more people quickly?
I don't know, dude. Look at like Edward Snowden or like fucking what's the other guy? Julian Assange. Like what those guys stood up and one's in what London or Russia right now. Like they're on Twitter, but like we talk about these things that should really be talked about, but they're not, right? And they get lost. You got the New York Times, you got all these guys that, sort of run the propaganda and what we understand and what we read. So I don't know. That's a good point though.
I guess I might just be optimistic then.
I, I I think you put it really well when you said that the feedback loop is quicker. That makes sense to me. But I think Micah's right in that while the feedback loop might be quicker, the scale is so much bigger.
Mhm.
And the
Yeah.
the top of mind example that has been referenced is Sam Bankman-Fried. I mean, that guy was able to, sure, it was only a couple year run, but that was a couple year run with tens of billions of dollars involved. An
Mhm.
incredible. I read the Michael Lewis book that just came out about him,
Oh,
Infinite, um, which is really interesting. Candidly, I think that Michael Lewis shed him in a too positive of a light. He kind of made him out to be this boy genius, who may not actually be bad,
yeah.
um, type of figure, and didn't really go into a lot of the financial fraud that was committed. But I see your point, Gavin, in that the the feedback loop might be quicker in terms of finding out who's a fraud because there's a lot more people that are able to poke holes in it. But I also agree with Micah that the scale is compounded in such a way that we've never seen before.
Right.
Hmm. I I mean I'm kind of going against what I'm saying, but in the 2008 financial crisis, it's because we trusted all these banks to write good loans, and in that trust and in that like viral moment of buying a house, and everybody and anybody could do it, we trusted them. I don't know if that has to do with the information, but I definitely think that they do scale up much quicker and they are faster to get found out.
Yeah,
But
no, two
I,
things though,
I
right?
think that we need to learn from that to get to an even quicker feedback loop so that scale doesn't happen. And I
Well,
think that's
like
what's going on right now.
even with the example you just gave though, right? Like the GFC happened, right? Feedback loop, we got that. Even if we had it, it wouldn't have changed sort of the relative scale, right? What basically happened with that was you had leaders, politicians, bankers, right, who you know, privatize the gains but socialize the losses. I mean, that's what happened, right? Our parents had to pay for it,
Hmm.
and that sort of is, sort of the reason why we're in the situation now with quantitative easing and sort of government spending being absolute. I mean, after that, interest rates go to zero. Now what's our deficit? 34 trillion and counting. So and we have a lot of the issues now, but that's what you have when you have sort of leaders and people who don't really have accountability for the decisions that they make, right? We're going to be stuck with trying to fix that. So that's a whole nother thing that we're definitely going to get into soon. But great
Well,
episode.
just to finish here, like on this topic, in Peter Thiel's speech, he kind of like he gave like a history of the world almost, like the decline and like the idea of like the priest and all this stuff, and like from like an olden day or whatever. And kind of his thing was now is like you have the rise of like the expert or the like
Yeah.
institutional like guy who knows all, right?
Hmm.
Whether that's like with science or like supplements, right? I just am addicted to the idea of Liver King because like that to me is just like he's just like the pinnacle of like essentially a fraud who like was able to like take all the social cues of like, look, I'm ripped, like so like all the teenage kids are like, oh, I want to be like him, and he's just like, oh yeah, just like eat liver and like you'll be big like me too. Um, but like I think that when you're in certain sectors that are especially like on the edge, that like whether it's entrepreneurship, right, pretty unregulated, or like the flow of money, which I mean is getting, I mean we've tried to regulate it, but in a way like you have to keep moving money. This is how like our economy works, right? Like so it's kind of unregulated. You can kind of like become a fraud because we know we need it, and we give a lot of power to certain individuals, and if you can kind of like trick everyone, like you can figure it out. And I think like Sam Bankman-Fried, like crypto, the whole point of it is to be unregulated, and some guy was able to like leverage that and essentially steal billions of dollars. So Yeah.
The topic that strings all these together, in my opinion, is the concept of institutional trust,
Yeah.
which we should talk about next week because institutional trust among young people is something that we could speak a lot on.
Right.
And when institutional trust is low, people look for alternatives.
Right.
And some of those alternatives will be good, but some of them will be the Sam Bankman-Fried. Some of them will be the Liver Kings of the world
Mm-hmm.
that will take advantage of the distrust and form that to serve their own ends.
Yeah, well, I look forward to it. But
Cool.
that brings episode 3 to an end. Always a pleasure, gentlemen, and we'll see all of you next week.
Let's do it.
All right.
See you, fellas.
Bye.
Yeah.